In this video, I'm going to be testing and demonstrating some of the issues with the Intel Revamp. I've heard people are becoming more and more aware of these, so hopefully that's good progress for getting these things fixed. But I wanted to put this on the record now so that hopefully someone sees it and is able to make sure nothing is missed. I've also gotten some feedback about separating some of my opinions from bug reports, and that's totally valid. So to make things nice and clear, I'm going to demonstrate directly the issues that I'm able to replicate that are not acting according to the patch notes, and I'll even put the notes right here on the screen so there's no doubt. Okay, so I'll start with probably the most glaring issue at the moment, Evade Target Lock. This ability is applied to an enemy target and results in two effects to your enemy. The first is a damage reduction to them, but only from damage coming from you. This can't be cleared, but it's not really the main issue. The second effect, a disable, is a huge problem. The patch notes read, "The duration of the disable is now subject to control resistances of the affected foe." That sounds perfectly reasonable, however we can observe that something isn't quite working correctly there. Let me demonstrate. Across from me is a ship using Evade Target Lock 3, which will disable me for 6 seconds according to the tooltip on that ship. I have normalized my test scenario here by unequipping all gear on both the attacking and receiving ships. Both ships have 100 control expertise from the skill tree, although at the moment my receiving ship has 125 due to a DOF assignment. It won't matter anyway. According to the skill tree, Control X is twice as effective at resisting control effects as it is at increasing them. This same behavior applies to drains as well, which I've done extensive testing on. In short, if my attacker will disable me for 6 seconds, and we have equal control skills, I should probably resist that time by half, so something like 3 seconds. Maybe it behaves in a different way, but I'm getting caught up in unnecessary fluff here. The point is, it doesn't matter what my control resistance is because I'll be disabled for the full amount of time on the attacker's tooltip no matter what. I also realized that some may not know what a disable looks like. If we look at my hotbars, I have skills on them. A disable effect prevents you from firing weapons, using abilities, or even using universal consoles, well, most of them at least. Basically, you'll see all of my abilities grayed out on the bars. The difference between a disable and a subsystem offline is that a subsystem offline only affects abilities tied to that system. For example, Gravity Well requires aux power to fire, so if my aux system is disabled, I can't use Gravity Well, but I could use other abilities. Think of a disable as the equivalent of all 4 power systems going offline at once. Since I don't have a deflector equipped right now, Gravity Well is already grayed out. I'll put a frame counter here and fire off the disable. You can see within a very small margin of error, the time I'm disabled matches the attacker's tooltip of 6 seconds. Alright, so that's at equal control skill amounts. What about if I have a ton of control resistance? I'm going to equip all these Control X consoles, the Delta engines, the jem'hadar deflector. This will raise my skill up to 562 control expertise. In theory, that should drastically reduce the amount of time I'm disabled by Evade Target Lock. As you can see, I'm disabled for the same duration as last time despite quadrupling my control skill. I think that pretty clearly demonstrates that this ability is not at all affected by control resistance as stated in the notes. Now as to why this is such a huge issue, let me demonstrate that. On my attacking ship, I've now added a substantial amount of control skill. Now my Evade Target Lock shows 13.1 seconds of disable at 450 control. Let's see that in action. So I'm disabled for a very long time, during which I cannot activate any abilities, most universal consoles, etc. Only team abilities are available. Most disables in the game are cleared by engineering team, such as the one from Photonic Shockwave, Trigobalt Torpedoes, and other subsystem offline effects. Subsystem offline effects are classified differently from disables, but it's still worth noting because the general effect is so similar. Since nothing clears the debuff effect, I'm going to be disabled for the full duration no matter what, and there's nothing I can do about it unless I have command set as my primary specialization, where I can use Boost Morale, which is an ability that clears all debuffs. The next thing is that there are traits which offer immunity to disables and other control effects. The easiest example of this is Evasive Tactics, which all players can get for free because it's a reputation trait. This trait reads, when affected by a root, hold, disable, or repel effect, immunity to control effects for 6.3 seconds. However, the disable from evade target lock does not activate this trait, and even if this trait is active beforehand, it doesn't counter ETL. Basically, we have an ability here that cannot be resisted and cannot be cleared by any means except for Boost Morale. This single ability alone has reshaped PvP drastically because the only option to deal with this is to use auxiliary to dampers for the disable immunity, so many players have been forced to use that. To make matters worse, sometimes evade target lock will still disable you even through aux to damp. But that one is hard to replicate reliably. It seems to happen more often in larger fights such as 5v5 arenas. Alright, on to the next one. This one's short and easy. Both EMP Probe and Ionic Turbulence are now classified as control effects, and it is stated in the notes that they can interact with applicable effects and triggers such as secondary deflectors. So I have one of each type of secondary deflector. Control abilities usually activate using the inhibiting secondary deflector, so I'll equip that one to start. If I hover over another control effect, like Gravity Well, there's a radiation damage listed on the tooltip here, and that's the secondary deflector. If I hover over Ionic Turbulence or EMP Probe, there's no damage listed, and even if I activate them and look at the combat log, no secondary deflector damage is applied. If I swap in the deteriorating secondary deflector, there's still no change on the tooltip. If I equip a resonating secondary deflector, this requires the ability to be activated, so I'll fire one off. No buff icon for the resonating deflector. That should settle that pretty clearly, but there is one other note. I mentioned that evade target lock doesn't trigger the control immunity traits like Evasive Tactics, and it's the same problem here. Ionic and EMP are both control effects now, and both of them have a disable or hold component, but neither of them is subject to these methods of avoiding control effects. EMP Probe, luckily, is cleared by engineering team like other disables, so that part works. Ionic, however, is not cleared by anything again except Boost Morale. The next part is the pilot abilities that were touched as part of the revamp. I'll start with a really easy one. Reroute Reserves to Weapons 1, a Lieutenant Commander ability, is no longer available to equip on a ship or train an officer. It's completely missing from the game. You can purchase the training manual, but you can't actually use it. This ability was modified with the release of the legendary jem'hadar ship, so I think that's when it went missing. Reroute Reserves to Weapons 2 and 3 are still present in the game. The next one is easy too. Attack pattern Lambda was adjusted at the same time as the Intel revamp in an effort to balance stealth. I won't voice my opinions on that part yet, but focus on factual data alone right here. Lambda 2 and 3 both increase the accuracy of enemies hit. However, Lambda 1 correctly reduces it, which is how all 3 ranks behaved before the revamp. This one should be an easy fix, I hope, since it's just flipping a value negative. Staying on attack pattern Lambda, I think the behavior of Lambda is a problem. Let me demonstrate in this example. I'm 5 kilometers away from my target, and they hit Intel team. I cannot target them or attack them for 9 seconds because I don't have enough perception. Lambda grants me perception, so if I had that perception from Lambda, I would be able to target and attack them. The problem is that, in order to get the perception from Lambda, I have to fire a weapon. So think of it this way, if my target is constantly cycling Intel teams, I may not ever be able to fire a weapon, and to overcome their cycling of Intel team, I need more perception, which requires me to fire a weapon that I can never fire. I think Lambda should provide its perception and accuracy buff on activation instead of requiring a weapon to fire, and I think there's a precedent for this too. Other attack patterns like Delta and Omega apply a self buff, and that buff is applied immediately when those are activated. Why is Lambda any different? This change would really help with dealing with stealth shipped, and since players can activate Intel Team every 10 seconds thanks to Fresh from R&R, and Intel Team has a stealth buff that lasts 9 seconds, the balance seems off to me at the moment. This is, of course, an opinion, but I find it hard to believe that this is the intended way this mechanic is supposed to work, especially with other perception boosting mechanics like emergency power to aux and the revamped Intel team both granting their perception bonuses directly on activation. If I roll my ship forward while they have Intel team activated, you'll see I'm able to target within a certain distance. That was like 4.4 kilometers there. Now my weapons fire and I can get the buff from Lambda. I'm just not sure why it works that way. I could go into the stealth mechanic balance more, but I've already talked that to death. At the moment, if you're not in a ship with pilot or intel or both, it's not possible to counter ship cycling Intel team, and that should be adjusted. I also don't want Intel team to be worthless either, so it's a really delicate balance. At the moment, the main culprit are ships cycling Intel team along with Lambda, which lowers the perception of targets hit. This allows ships that could normally be countered even by non-pilot or non-Intel ships almost invulnerable except to very specific setups, like the pilot Intel jem'hadar attack ship build I did in a video last week. Otherwise, I like the mechanics of how it works now. Intel team users basically force their opponents to get closer to them, which adds a lot of speed and piloting skill into PvP. If you've ever watched some of my arena videos, you'll notice that I get very close to ships using Intel team, and this is why. The closer I am, the less effective their stealth is, which allows me to attack them. I think that's a cool mechanic and it works really well. My worry is that if I'm fully specialized for this type of role and I still cannot target someone even at 0 kilometers sometimes, how will this affect players just getting into PvP who may not understand stealth or know what gear to use to boost perception? And if they have ships that lack intel or pilot seating, they can equip every perception boosting item in the game and still not be able to target, and I feel like that's a problem. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope this makes the issues I've reported crystal clear and helps get them resolved.